The rain drummed against the windows of Emma Richardson's tiny studio apartment on the north side of Chicago, creating a rhythmic soundtrack to her Friday night solitude. At 26, she had grown accustomed to spending her evenings alone, hunched over her laptop, working on design projects that barely paid enough to cover rent. The city lights blurred through the wet glass, painting streaks of gold and red across her cramped living space. Emma pushed a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and leaned back against the worn cushions of her second-hand couch. The half-empty bottle of red wine on the coffee table beckoned to her, and she poured herself another generous glass. It had been 3 months since her breakup with Tyler. 3 months since he had told her she was too ambitious for her own good, too focused on a career that was going nowhere. The words still stung, especially on nights like this, when the silence felt heavier than usual. Her phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Sophia, her best friend since college, had posted a photo from some rooftop party downtown. Everyone looked glamorous and carefree, living the kind of life Emma had once imagined for herself. She took a long sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through her chest, loosening the tight knot of loneliness that had taken up permanent residence there. Maybe Tyler was right. Maybe she needed to loosen up, to stop being so serious about everything. Her eyes drifted to her contacts list, landing on his name. Before she could overthink it, her fingers began moving across the screen, typing out words she would never have dared to say sober. The wine had unlocked something reckless inside her, something that had been caged for too long. The message poured out of her in a rush of vulnerability and desire. She wrote about missing him, about lying awake, thinking of his hands on her skin, about wanting him to show up at her door and make her forget all the reasons they had fallen apart. Her heart raced as she typed the words, both terrifying and exhilarating. When she finished, she hovered over the send button for only a moment before pressing it with wine-fueled courage. The message showed as delivered, and Emma felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety wash over her. She set the phone down and reached for her wine glass again, trying to calm the nervous energy coursing through her veins. What had she done? But maybe this was exactly what she needed, a chance to reclaim something she had lost, to prove to herself that she could still take risks. 40 minutes passed in a blur of second-guessing and more wine. Emma had almost convinced herself that Tyler would not respond at all when her phone buzzed. But it was not a text. It was her doorbell, the sound cutting through the quiet apartment like an alarm. Her heart leaped into her throat. He had actually come. Tyler had read her message and rushed over just like she had fantasized. She jumped up from the couch, nearly knocking over her wine glass in the process. Her reflection in the hallway mirror showed messy hair, flushed cheeks, and old sweatpants paired with an oversized college t-shirt. Not exactly seductive, but there was no time to change. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Emma took a deep breath, smoothed down her hair, and opened the door. The man standing in her doorway was definitely not Tyler. He was taller, broader in the shoulders, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain, and his steel-gray eyes studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. She recognized him immediately, though they had only met twice before. Both times in professional settings that felt like a lifetime ago. Julian Blackwood, the CEO of Blackwood Industries, a man whose name appeared regularly in business magazines, and whose company she had done a small branding project for 6 months ago. A man she had exchanged maybe 20 professional emails with, always formal, always brief. And apparently, the man she had just sent the most intimate message of her life to. Emma felt all the blood drained from her face as the realization crashed over her like a cold wave. In her wine-induced haze, she must have scrolled past Tyler's name and selected Julian's contact instead. They were alphabetically close in her phone, and she had been too careless, too drunk, too stupid to notice. "Miss Richardson," Julian said, his voice deep and controlled, with just a hint of something she could not quite identify. Amusement, maybe, or curiosity. "I received your message." Emma opened and closed her mouth several times, trying to form words, but nothing came out. She felt like she might actually die from embarrassment right there in her doorway. This could not be happening. This man, this incredibly wealthy, powerful, intimidatingly handsome man, had read her desperate, longing message meant for someone else entirely. "I know this is unexpected," Julian continued, when she failed to speak. He glanced past her into the apartment, then back to her face. "May I come in?" I think we should talk about this. It was not. Oh my God, Emma finally managed, her voice coming out as a strangled whisper. That message was not for you. It was a mistake. A huge, terrible mistake. Something flickered across Julian's face. If Emma did not know better, she might have called it disappointment. I see, you meant to send it to someone else. Yes, my ex-boyfriend. I was drinking and feeling lonely, and I just... I am so sorry. This is mortifying. Emma wanted to close the door, crawl under her covers, and never emerge again. Emma, the way he said her name, without the formal Miss Richardson, made her look up at him. His expression had softened slightly, the hard lines of his face relaxing. May I still come in? Just for a moment. Every instinct told her to refuse to end this humiliating encounter as quickly as possible. But something in his eyes stopped her. He had driven here in the rain, had left whatever important Friday night plans a billionaire CEO must have to show up at her door. The least she could do was hear him out. Even if she wanted to disappear into the floor, she stepped back and gestured for him to enter. Julian walked past her, and she caught a hint of his cologne. Something expensive and masculine that made her head spin more than the wine had. He stood in the center of her small living room, looking completely out of place among her mismatched furniture and budget artwork. His suit probably cost more than everything in the room combined. I should explain, Emma started, closing the door and wrapping her arms around herself. I have been drinking, obviously. I was looking at my phone and I just did not pay attention to which contact I was selecting. It was careless and unprofessional, and I am truly sorry that you had to read that. Julian turned to face her fully, his hands sliding into his pockets. Unprofessional, he repeated, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Is that what concerns you most about this situation? Among other things, Emma admitted, her cheeks burning. You are a client. Well, you were a client. And I just sent you a message that was completely inappropriate. And I understand if you want to report me or blacklist me or whatever it is that people do in situations like this. Report. At you for what? Being human? Julian's smile grew a fraction wider. Emma, I came here because that message was the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years. Even if it was not meant for me. Emma stared at him, confusion replacing some of her embarrassment. I do not understand. I know you do not. He looked around the apartment again, his gaze landing on the wine bottle and the laptop surrounded by scattered papers on her makeshift desk. When was the last time you did something spontaneous? Something that scared you? The question caught her off guard. Emma thought back through the past few months, the past year even. Every decision had been calculated, every move designed to minimize risk and maximize stability. After her divorce from Tyler, she had built walls around herself, convinced that safety was more important than excitement. I honestly cannot remember, she said quietly. Julian nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already suspected. I drive past your building every day on my way to the office. Did you know that? For 6 months, I have driven past this building, and sometimes I wonder about the woman who designed that logo. The one with the clever use of negative space that none of my other consultants had thought of. I wonder if she is happy, if she is doing work that challenges her, if she ever thinks about that project we worked on together. Emma's heart began to pound for an entirely different reason now. You think about me? More than I should, Julian admitted. And there was something vulnerable in his voice that she had never heard before. Not in their email exchanges, not in their brief meetings. I almost contacted you a dozen times, but I could never think of a professional reason that would not seem like an excuse. And I do not do things without a logical reason. Emma, I have spent my entire adult life building an empire based on careful planning and calculated risks. I do not show up at people's apartments on rainy Friday nights because of a text message. Then why are you here? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian took a step closer. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Because that message, even though it was not meant for me, reminded me that I have forgotten how to feel anything real. And when I read those words, I realized that I did not want them to be meant for someone else. I wanted them to be for me. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Emma knew she should be terrified. Should be backing away from this man who represented everything she was not, everything she could never be. But instead, she found herself taking a step closer, drawn by the raw honesty in his eyes. I do not know you, she said, though it felt like a weak protest even to her own ears. No, Julian agreed. But maybe that is the point. Maybe we both need to take a chance on something we do not know, something we cannot plan or control. He paused, searching her face. Or you can ask me to leave, and we can both go back to our carefully constructed lives and pretend this never happened. The choice is yours, Emma. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the expensive suit and the corporate success. She saw a man who was just as lonely as she was, just as tired of playing it safe. And in that moment, Emma Richardson made a decision that would change everything. Stay, she said simply. Stay, and we can figure out what this is. Julian removed his suit jacket and draped it carefully over the arm of her couch, a gesture that somehow made him seem more human, more accessible. Emma watched as he loosened his tie, the simple action feeling unexpectedly intimate in the small space of her apartment. She suddenly became acutely aware of how close they were standing, how the air between them seemed charged with an energy she had not felt in years. Would you like some wine? Emma asked, needing something to do with her hands, some way to break the tension that was both thrilling and terrifying. Please, Julian said, settling onto her couch with an ease that surprised her. For a man who probably lived in a penthouse worth millions, he did not seem uncomfortable in her modest surroundings. If anything, he looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him in their previous professional encounters. Emma poured them both fresh glasses and sat down in the chair across from him, maintaining a safe distance even as every nerve in her body seemed to be pulling her closer. So, she began, taking a sip of wine for courage. You drive past my building every day? A slight smile played at Julian's lips. I do. Every morning at 7:30? Every evening around 6? Sometimes later if I am working late, which is most nights. That is a lot of structure, Emma observed, studying him over the rim of her glass. Do you ever deviate from the schedule? Never, Julian admitted. Not until tonight. He leaned back against the cushions, his gray eyes never leaving her face. My life runs on schedules and plans, Emma. It has to. When you are responsible for thousands of employees and billions of dollars in assets, spontaneity becomes a luxury you cannot afford. That sounds exhausting, Emma said softly. It is. The confession seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her, but it is also safe, predictable. I always know what to expect, how to prepare, how to respond. There are no surprises in my world. Emma set her glass down on the coffee table and leaned forward slightly. Is that why you came here tonight? Because I surprised you? Julian considered the question carefully, his fingers tracing the stem of his wine glass. Partly. But also, because I have spent the last 6 months trying to convince myself that the fascination I felt during our project was purely professional. That the way you challenged my team's assumptions, the creativity you brought to something as mundane as a corporate logo, was just impressive work and nothing more. And now? Emma asked, her heart beating faster. Now I am sitting in your apartment, and I realize I was lying to myself. Julian met her eyes directly. No hesitation, no calculation. Just raw honesty. Tell me about yourself, Emma. Not the professional version I saw in meetings. The real version. The woman who sends passionate messages after too much wine. Who lives in this apartment full of half-finished art projects and dreams. Something about his request. The genuine curiosity in his voice made Emma's walls start to crumble. She found herself talking, really talking, in a way she had not done with anyone in months. She told him about growing up in a small town in Wisconsin, about her parents who had sacrificed everything to send her to art school in Chicago. She talked about her marriage to Tyler, about how she had slowly lost herself trying to be the person he wanted her to be. He said I was too ambitious, Emma said, surprised by the emotion that still crept into her voice. But the truth is, I was not ambitious enough. I let him convince me to take safe clients, to do boring work that paid the bills. I stopped taking risks, stopped pushing myself creatively, and in the end, I still was not enough for him. Julian set his wine glass down and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. His loss, he said simply, that logo you designed for Blackwood Industries had more creativity and intelligence than anything my in-house team has produced in years. You have a gift, Emma. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. The compliment, coming from someone whose opinion she respected professionally, meant more than she wanted to admit. Thank you, she said quietly. What about you? What is the real Julian Blackwood like? The one who does not appear in business magazines and financial reports? Julian was quiet for a long moment, and Emma worried she had pushed too far. But then he began to speak, his voice lower, more reflective. I grew up poor, he said. Not struggling middle class, but genuinely poor. My father worked in a factory, my mother cleaned houses. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with my 3 siblings. And there were nights when dinner was just bread and whatever we could afford at the food bank. Emma listened, seeing him in an entirely new light. When I was 16, my father had a stroke. He survived, but he could not work anymore. I took 3 jobs while finishing high school, and I promised myself that no one in my family would ever go hungry again, that we would never have to choose between electricity and groceries. Julian's jaw tightened slightly. That promise became my entire life. Building the company, making money, creating security. Somewhere along the way, I forgot how to do anything else. You took care of your family, Emma said gently. That is not something to regret. No, Julian agreed. But I'm 34 years old, and I just realized tonight that I cannot remember the last time I did something just because I wanted to. Because it served some larger purpose or fit into some grand plan. I cannot remember the last time I felt anything that was not related to a quarterly earnings report or a board meeting. They sat in silence for a moment. 2 people from completely different worlds who had somehow found common ground in their shared loneliness. Their shared sense of having lost something essential along the way. Can I tell you something? Emma said finally. When we worked together on that project, I used to look forward to your emails. They were always so precise and thoughtful, and you asked questions that made me think harder about my work. I would spend hours crafting responses, trying to impress you.
Ow.
Julian's expression softened. I kept every single one of those emails. I told myself it was for documentation purposes, but the truth is I just wanted to preserve those conversations. You made me think about things differently, made me question assumptions I had held for years. The confession created a shift in the atmosphere between them. Emma stood and moved to sit beside him on the couch, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. So what do we do now? She asked. We have both admitted that there is something here, something neither of us expected. But you are Julian Blackwood, Billionaire CEO, and I am Emma Richardson, struggling freelance designer. How does that even work? Julian turned to face her fully, and she could see the conflict playing out behind his eyes. I do not know, he admitted. But I am tired of always knowing, Emma. I am tired of having everything planned and calculated and safe. Maybe it is time I took a risk on something that scares me. Do I scare you? Emma asked, a hint of amusement in her voice despite the seriousness of the moment. Terrify me, Julian said, but he was smiling. You make me want things I have convinced myself I do not. Need connection, spontaneity, someone who sees past the suits in the boardrooms, to whatever is left of the person underneath. Emma reached out and took his hand. Feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. I see you, she said softly. And you are not as scary as you think you are, Mr. Blackwood. Julian, he corrected, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. When we are here like this, I am just Julian. They talked for hours, losing track of time as the rain continued to fall outside and the wine bottle grew emptier. Emma learned about Julian's love of classic literature, a passion he had no time to indulge anymore. He learned about her dream of opening her own design studio, a dream she had set aside as impractical. They shared stories from their childhoods, their failures, their fears about the future. At some point, Emma found herself leaning against Julian's shoulder, his arm wrapped around her in a way that felt both natural and revolutionary. She could not remember the last time she had felt this comfortable with someone, this understood. Tyler had never really listened to her, not like this. He had always been waiting for his turn to talk, to insert his own opinions and judgments. But Julian listened with his whole attention, asked follow-up questions, remembered details she mentioned in passing. It is 3 a.m, Julian said eventually, glancing at his watch. I should let you get some sleep. Emma sat up, immediately missing the warmth of his presence. You could stay, she offered, then quickly added, on the couch, I mean. It is late, and you have been drinking. I would feel terrible if something happened to you driving home. Julian studied her face, searching for something. Are you sure? I am sure, Emma said, and she meant it. She was not ready for this night to end, for the magic of this unexpected connection to dissolve back into the reality of their very different lives. She brought him a blanket and an extra pillow, suddenly self-conscious about how threadbare they were compared to what he was probably used to. But Julian accepted them with genuine gratitude, already removing his tie and dress shirt to reveal a simple white t-shirt underneath. "Emma," he said as she turned to head to her bedroom. "Thank you for tonight. For taking a chance on something unexpected." "Thank you for showing up," she replied, smiling. Even if it was because of a message meant for someone else, Emma lay in bed that night, staring at her ceiling and listening to the rain. She could not quite believe what had happened. Julian Blackwood, one of the most powerful men in Chicago, was sleeping on her couch. And somehow it felt exactly right. The next morning, Emma woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in her kitchen. For a moment she thought she had dreamed the entire previous night. But when she emerged from her bedroom, still in her pajamas, with her hair a tangled mess, she found Julian standing at her stove, cooking eggs with the few ingredients he had managed to find in her mostly bare refrigerator. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I hope you do not mind. I am not much of a cook, but I can manage breakfast." Emma leaned against the doorframe, taking in the surreal sight of this man in her kitchen, still wearing his dress pants from the night before, but with his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair slightly mussed from sleep. "I do not mind at all," she said, unable to stop herself from smiling back. They ate breakfast together at her small table, and the conversation flowed just as easily as it had the night before. Julian told her about a book he had just finished, a classic novel he had been rereading for the third time. Emma shared her frustration with a difficult client who kept changing their mind about a logo design. They talked like old friends, like people who had known each other for years instead of hours. "I should probably go," Julian said eventually, though he made no move to stand. "I have some work I need to catch up on." "On a Saturday?" Emma asked, raising an eyebrow. Julian had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Bad habit. Or maybe," Emma suggested carefully, "you could stay a little longer. We could go for a walk. Get real coffee from the cafe down the street, unless you have somewhere more important to be." Julian looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with the decision, weighing his habitual need for control against this new desire for spontaneity. Finally, he smiled. "A walk sounds perfect." He spent the rest of the morning exploring Emma's neighborhood, places Julian had never been despite living in Chicago his entire life. She showed him her favorite used bookstore, the tiny art gallery where she sometimes displayed her personal work, the park where she went to sketch when she needed inspiration. Julian was attentive and curious, asking questions about her life with genuine interest. When they stopped for coffee at a small cafe, Julian insisted on paying, though Emma protested. "Let me," he said simply. "Not because I am wealthy and you are not, but because I want to. Because this is the best morning I have had in years." Emma relented, touched by his sincerity. They sat at a corner table, and she noticed how people did not seem to recognize him here. Away from the business district and his usual haunts, he was just another guy having coffee with a woman, and she could see how much he valued that anonymity. "What happens now?" Emma asked, voicing the question that had been building in her mind all morning. "After today, I mean, do we go back to being strangers? Do we pretend this never happened?" Julian reached across the table and took her hand. "I do not want to go back to being strangers. Emma, I do not know exactly what this is or where it is going, but I know I want to see you again. If you want that too." "I do," Emma said without hesitation. "But Julian, our lives are so different. You move in circles I could never access, have responsibilities I could never understand. How do we bridge that gap?" "One day at a time," Julian said. "No plans, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other and seeing where it leads. Can you do that? Can you take that risk with me?" Emma thought about her life before last night. The safe and predictable routine she had fallen into, the walls she had built to protect herself from getting hurt again. And then she thought about how alive she had felt talking with Julian, how seen and understood. Sometimes the biggest risk was not taking one at all. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hand. "I can do that." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of unexpected moments and deepening connection. Julian and Emma fell into a pattern of seeing each other whenever his schedule allowed, which turned out to be more often than Emma had expected. He would show up at her apartment after work, still in his suit, but with his tie already loosened, looking tired but genuinely happy to see her. They would cook dinner together or order takeout, and talk for hours about everything and nothing. Emma introduced Julian to her world, taking him to art exhibitions and poetry readings, places where he could be anonymous and normal. In return, Julian helped Emma see possibilities for her career that she had never considered, connecting her with potential clients and offering business advice that came from years of experience. But he was careful never to overstep, never to make her feel like a charity case or a project to be managed. Sophia, Emma's best friend, was less enthusiastic about the relationship. She cornered Emma at their usual Saturday brunch spot 3 weeks after that first night, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Emma, what are you doing?" Sophia asked, her coffee cup clutched between her hands. "Julian Blackwood? Really? Do you have any idea how this looks?" "How? What looks?" Emma asked, though she knew exactly what Sophia meant. "A wealthy CEO showing up in your life right when you are at your most vulnerable? Come on, Emma, you are smarter than this. What happens when he gets bored and moves on to the next interesting project?" The words stung because they echoed Emma's own fears, the doubts that kept her awake at night when Julian was not there. "It is not like that," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "He is genuine, Sophia. I know it seems unlikely, but what we have is real." Sophia sighed and reached across the table to take Emma's hand. "I just do not want to see you get hurt again. You are just starting to put yourself back together after Tyler. If this goes wrong, it could destroy you." "I know the risks," Emma said quietly, "but he is worth it. We are worth it." But as the weeks turned into a month, Emma began to notice small cracks in their perfect bubble. Julian's phone was always ringing, always pulling him away for urgent business matters. He would apologize profusely, but the interruptions were constant reminders of the vast differences in their lives. And then there were the times when he would become distant, lost in thoughts about deals and strategies that Emma could not fully understand or participate in. The real trouble started when Victoria Sterling returned to Chicago. Julian's ex-fiancée had been living in New York for the past 2 years, and Emma had only heard about her in passing references that Julian clearly did not enjoy making. Victoria was everything Emma was not: sophisticated, wealthy, perfectly polished. She came from the same world as Julian, understood his pressures and responsibilities in ways Emma never could. Emma first learned about Victoria's return from a gossip website that Sophia texted her one afternoon. The headline read, "Blackwood Industries CEO spotted with former flame at charity gala." The accompanying photo showed Julian in a tuxedo standing next to a stunning blonde woman in a designer gown. They were not touching, but the caption speculated about a rekindled romance. When Julian came over that evening, Emma had the article pulled up on her laptop. "Who is Victoria Sterling?" she asked without preamble. Julian's expression immediately shuddered, the walls coming back up. "Where did you hear that name?" Emma turned the laptop around to show him the article. "The internet. Apparently you two were photographed together last night. Were you planning to mention that?" Julian sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It was a charity event I had committed 2 months ago. Victoria was there because her family donated a significant amount. We exchanged maybe 10 words the entire night." "But you did not tell me about it," Emma pressed, hating how insecure she sounded but unable to stop herself. "Why not?" "Because it did not mean anything," Julian said, his voice taking on an edge of frustration. "Victoria is my past, Emma. You are my present. I do not report every social obligation to you." "This is not about reporting," Emma said, standing up to face him. "This is about the fact that you live in a world I do not understand, with people like Victoria Sterling who probably think I am completely wrong for you." "I do not care what Victoria thinks," Julian said sharply. Then, more softly, "Emma, please, do not let gossip and speculation ruin what we have." But the damage was done. Over the next few days, Emma could not stop thinking about that photograph, about how natural Julian looked in that world of galas and designer gowns. She began to question everything, wondering if she was just a temporary diversion for him, a walk on the wild side before he returned to the life he was meant to live. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, when Emma received a phone call from an unknown number. When she answered, a smooth, cultured female voice greeted her. "Emma Richardson? This is Victoria Sterling. I think we should talk." Emma's blood ran cold. "I do not think we have anything to discuss." "On the contrary," Victoria said, her tone pleasant but firm. "We have quite a lot to discuss, namely Julian. I understand you have been seeing each other." "That is none of your business," Emma said, her hand tightening on the phone. "Actually, it is. You see, Julian and I have a history, a connection that goes far deeper than whatever little fling you two are enjoying. His family knows my family. We move in the same circles, understand the same pressures. We were engaged for a reason, Emma. We fit together in ways that you and he never will." "If you fit so well together, why did you break up?" Emma asked, forcing herself to stay calm. Victoria laughed softly. "A misunderstanding, nothing more. One that I intend to correct. I am back in Chicago permanently now, and Julian and I have been talking." "He has not told you that, has he?" Emma felt sick. "I do not believe you." "Believe what you want," Victoria said. "But ask yourself this, why would a man like Julian Blackwood, who could have anyone, settle for a struggling designer living in a studio apartment? You are a novelty, Emma, an escape from his real life. But novelties wear off, and when they do, he will come back to where he belongs. With someone like me." The call ended, and Emma stood frozen in her apartment, Victoria's words echoing in her mind. She wanted to dismiss them as the manipulations of a jealous ex, but they struck too close to her own fears. Her own doubts about whether she truly belonged in Julian's life. When Julian came over that evening, Emma was sitting on her couch, her arms wrapped around her knees. He took one look at her face and immediately sat down beside her. "What happened?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Victoria called me," Emma said quietly. "She told me that you two have been talking, that I am just a temporary distraction for you." Julian's jaw tightened. That woman is unbelievable. "Emma, whatever she said, it is not true." "Yes, we have spoken a few times since she returned to Chicago, but only about business matters. Her family's company does work with mine occasionally. That is all." "Is it?" Emma asked, looking at him directly. "Because she seemed very confident that you would eventually come back to her, back to the world where you belong." "I belong with you," Julian said firmly, taking her hands in his. "Emma, do not let her get in your head. She is trying to manipulate you, to drive a wedge between us." "Maybe she is right, though," Emma said, pulling her hands away. "Maybe I am just fooling myself thinking this could work. We are from completely different worlds, Julian. You have obligations and expectations that I cannot even begin to understand. And I am just a struggling designer who accidentally sent you a text message." "Stop," Julian said, his voice sharp. "Do not reduce what we have to that. You are not just anything, Emma. You are brilliant and creative and real in ways that no one else in my life has ever been. Yes, our worlds are different, but that does not mean we cannot build something together." "But what are we building?" Emma asked, her voice breaking. "Where is this going, Julian?" "Because I am falling for you, and it terrifies me. What happens when you decide that this experiment in normalcy is not enough anymore? What happens when you go back to charity galas and women like Victoria who understand your life?" Julian stood up abruptly, pacing across the small room. "I cannot believe you are actually listening to her poison. After everything we have shared, you still think I am just playing games with you." "I think you do not know what you want," Emma said, standing to face him. "I think part of you is drawn to the simplicity of this, of us, but another part of you knows that your real life, your real responsibilities are in that other world, and eventually you are going to have to choose." "Then I choose you," Julian said, his voice rising. "I choose this, us, whatever we are building together. Is not that enough?" "I do not know," Emma admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I do not know if it can be enough when everything else is pulling you in a different direction." They stood there, the space between them feeling insurmountable despite the small size of the apartment. Finally, Julian spoke, his voice quiet and controlled again. "I think I should go. Give you some space to think about what you really want." He left without kissing her goodbye, and Emma collapsed onto her couch, sobbing. She had pushed him away, let her fears and insecurities destroy the best thing that had happened to her in years, But maybe it was for the best. Maybe they were always destined to fail, to people from different worlds, trying to force a connection that could never truly work. 3 days passed in miserable silence. Julian did not call or text, and Emma could not bring herself to reach out first. She threw herself into work, taking on extra projects to keep her mind occupied, but nothing helped. Everywhere she looked, she was reminded of him, of what they had shared, and what she had lost. On the 4th day, Sophia showed up at her apartment with takeout and a determined expression. "All right, enough moping. Tell me what actually happened." Emma recounted the conversation with Victoria, the fight with Julian, all of it. Sophia listened without interrupting, and when Emma finished, she shook her head. "You are an idiot," Sophia said bluntly. "Excuse me? You heard me? Emma, that man is clearly crazy about you. And you pushed him away because you were scared. Not because he did anything wrong. Not because Victoria Sterling actually threatened what you have, but because you are terrified of being happy." "That is not fair," Emma protested. "Is not it? You have been punishing yourself since Tyler left, convincing yourself that you are not good enough, that you do not deserve something real. And then Julian shows up, this incredible man who sees you for who you really are, and what do? You find reasons to sabotage it." Emma opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Because Sophia was right. She had been looking for an excuse to run, to protect herself from the possibility of getting hurt again. And she had found one in Victoria's manipulative phone call and her own insecurities. "What do I do?" Emma asked quietly. "You fight for him," Sophia said simply. "You figure out what you really want, and then you fight for it with everything you have. Because Emma, that kind of connection does not come along very often. And if you let it slip away because you are scared, you will regret it for the rest of your life." Emma spent the rest of the evening thinking about Sophia's words. She thought about the past month with Julian, about how he had shown up for her again and again, how he had opened up in ways that clearly terrified him, how he had chosen her every single day despite the vast differences in their circumstances, and she had thrown it all away because she was afraid. The next morning, Emma got up early and showered, putting on her best dress and actually doing her hair and makeup with care. She was going to fix this, even if it meant marching into Julian's office and demanding he'd listen to her. She was done letting fear control her life. But when she arrived at Blackwood Industries headquarters, the receptionist informed her that Mr. Blackwood was not in the office. Emma's heart sank until the woman added, "But his assistant mentioned he is at the Riverside Cafe on Wells Street. He goes there sometimes when he needs to think." Emma thanked her and practically ran the 3 blocks to the cafe. She found Julian sitting alone at an outdoor table, staring at a cup of coffee that looked untouched. He looked tired, she realized with a pang of guilt. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually immaculate suit was slightly rumpled. "Julian," she said softly. Approaching his table, he looked up, surprise flashing across his face before it settled into something more guarded. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," she said, sitting down across from him without waiting for an invitation. "And to tell you that I have been an idiot." "Emma, you do not have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "I let Victoria get in my head. I let my own fears and insecurities convince me that what we have could not possibly be real. But it is real, Julian. It is the most real thing I have felt in years, and I almost destroyed it because I was too scared to believe I deserved it." Julian was quiet for a long moment, his fingers wrapped around his coffee cup. "I have been thinking too," he said finally. "About what you said, about me not knowing what I want? And you were right, Emma. Part of me has been holding back, trying to keep one foot in my old life while exploring this new one with you. But I realize now that you cannot do that. You have to choose." Emma felt her heart constrict. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. He was going to choose his old life, the safe and predictable path that made sense for someone like him. "I choose you," Julian said, his gray eyes meeting hers with absolute certainty. "I choose us, whatever that looks like. I am tired of living a life that looks perfect on paper, but feels empty inside. You make me want to be better, to do better, to actually live, instead of just existing in a series of quarterly reports and board meetings." Relief flooded through Emma so intensely that she felt dizzy. "I choose you too," she said, her voice shaking. "I choose taking the risk, being scared, building something that might not make sense to anyone else, but makes perfect sense to us. Julian reached across the table and took her hand, and Emma felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in days. "So, where do we go from here?" he asked. "Forward," Emma said simply. "Together. No more letting other people's opinions or expectations dictate what we do. No more letting fear keep us from being honest with each other." Julian smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him in days. "I can work with that." They sat there for hours, talking through everything that had happened, laying it all out honestly. Julian told her about his complicated history with Victoria, about the pressure his board had put on him to marry someone from the right family, about how he had always done what was expected of him until he met Emma. Emma told him about her marriage to Tyler, about how she had lost herself trying to be someone else's version of perfect, about her determination to never do that again. "I cannot promise this will be easy," Julian said as they finally prepared to leave. "There will be people who do not understand, who think you are after my money or that I am having some kind of midlife crisis at 34. Let them think what they want," Emma said firmly. "I know why I am here. I am here because you make me laugh, because you listen to me, because you see me as I really am and love me anyway." Julian froze, his hand on hers. "Love." Emma felt her cheeks heat, but she did not take it back. "Yes, love. I love you, Julian Blackwood. I probably have since that first night when you showed up at my door in the rain and stayed to talk until 3 in the morning.
Oh.
Julian pulled her to her feet and kissed her. Right there on the street corner with people walking past and car horns honking in the background. When he pulled back, he was grinning. "I love you too, Emma Richardson, and I am done pretending otherwise." 6 months later, Emma stood in the storefront space that would soon house her new design studio. The lease papers were signed, the renovations were beginning next week, and she could hardly believe it was real. Julian had helped her secure a business loan, had connected her with contractors, but he had been careful to let it be her dream, her accomplishment. "What do you think?" she asked as Julian surveyed the empty space with an appraising eye. "I think it is perfect," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I think you are going to do incredible things here." It figured out a rhythm that worked for them. Julian had started delegating more at work, making time for actual life outside the office. Emma had expanded her client base, her confidence growing with each successful project. They were building something together, a life that honored both of their ambitions while leaving room for spontaneity and joy. Victoria. But Julian had finally confronted her directly, making it clear that he had moved on and she needed to as well. She'd eventually given up and found a new target for her attention, much to everyone's relief. "I have something for you," Julian said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Emma's heart skipped. "Julian, what is this?" "Open it and see." Inside was a simple silver necklace, with a small pendant shaped like an artist's palette. It was not expensive or ostentatious, but it was thoughtful and personal in a way that made Emma's eyes water. "I saw it and thought of you," Julian explained. "Of the artist you are, the dreamer who took a chance on a stranger who showed up at her door, the woman who taught me how to actually live." Emma threw her arms around him, holding tight. "I love it. I love you." "I love you too," Julian murmured against her hair. "Thank you for sending that message, even if it was by accident," Emma laughed, pulling back to look at him. "Thank you for showing up, for staying, for choosing this messy, unpredictable life with me. Best decision I ever made," Julian said, and kissed her softly. They stood there in the empty storefront. Two people from different worlds who